So thank you guys for coming today. So we're going to talk just about optimizing Excel for analytics. And so basically what we're going to do is focus on 5 things. We're going to talk about how big data right now is this wave of disruption. And if you're not able to get your data managed and put it into a process, you're going to start having trouble. And to be able to take advantage of big data and have a good process, it's required to have a plan. You got to be able to do something strategic. And one of the ways to help you with your plan is to make sure that you're able to get the most value out of your data. And so having your data optimized to be able to use in Excel is important. And then once you have all your data optimized and you put it through Excel, there's a lot of things you can do to kind of like have shortcuts and tips and different things in Excel that can make it a much more powerful tool. And then we'll talk briefly at the end about visualization. Making impactful visuals that really drive people's decision making, that really influences people. It's not as easy as we all think it is. And so knowing how to use Excel, one of the most undervalued but most, in the end, most valuable things to do with Excel is not so much analyzing the data, but how you present it or share it. Because very rarely do we analyze data in Excel just for ourselves. Generally, we're going to share it with somebody, a decision maker, somebody else on our team, a boss, somebody that may need the data to be able to decide what to do. And when we visualize that data, we often fall into a lot of traps that we don't realize we're even falling into when it comes to making the data insightful and impactful. So we'll talk about those things briefly today. A little about myself. So I have a background in analytics. I've been working almost 20 years now in analytics. I worked for Wells Fargo Bank for a long time as a senior analyst. I have a master's in education, so I was a teacher before I worked for Wells Fargo, and I left Wells Fargo back in 2011 and have been doing training and consulting ever since on analytics. I'm at that point in life where I'm right here. I like what I do. I'm good at it, and people pay me for it. So this is my favorite thing to do, to talk to an audience about analytics, to have conversations with people about what they're doing in their business and how they're using their data so that I can see what's kind of the picture of your business and get an idea of where I can help you. And at the same time, I'll learn from you. And so actually in some cases, I find these sessions are actually more beneficial for me just to kind of hear what the cutting edge uses of data are and what the hot topics are in people using data. So that's kind of briefly what I'm all about. I have a company called Sonic Analytics based here in Ocala. And I've been around mainly in the Philippines and Asia and in California since 2011. I've done over 186 corporate trainings. I've trained over 8,000 people, and I've worked on over 50 analytics projects with my company in the last several years. So like I said, this is what I do and what I love. So I want to share with you a little information about analytics. Before I do that, though, I want to get an idea of who's here. And even though I know you guys, just for the record, if you wouldn't mind sharing who you are, what you do for a living, and what brought you here today. So, James?
Gotcha. I'm James. I am an IT generalist or a system administrator. And I also have a hand in some of the e-commerce stuff we do.
Okay.
So I would love to get a better idea of what data can do for me on the e-commerce side to further sell products.
Okay. And as you know, e-commerce, it's all about knowing your numbers to look and see how things are selling, what's not selling, how you can increase or decrease, pricing, looking at overall profits. There's so much data that e-commerce is dependent on. So that's great. Okay, cool. And Andrew, how about you?
I'm Andrew Camo. I specialize in databases, working with data. I'm a software consultant, and I basically work with businesses to help them find the right solution. I'm also a technology author. I've written a couple books, and I write articles. So it's always helpful for me to learn more about data solutions and how to analyze big sets of data and so on.
Great, awesome. Okay, well, I'm glad you guys are here. I think we have a lot of different experiences that we can share with each other throughout the talk. So big data is a wave of disruption. And to survive what's becoming a tsunami of information that is overwhelming many businesses, we have to understand how to surf that wave. And to be that surfer surfing that wave, we have to have the right board. And for analytics, our analytics tools, our applications, our technologies, our techniques, our trainings, that's our board that keeps us from being overwhelmed by this tsunami. And if you think about how much data we create every day, it's a massive amount of information. as individually, as a country, as a society, as a world, we're creating so much data that if you're not able to navigate it right, to stay on top of that, you can get crushed. And so we see big data as a wave of disruption, both in the example that you can use it to be disruptive, or you can be disrupted. A great example is Waze. We all kind of probably familiar with Waze. Waze is a GPS app, and Waze is used to basically tell us how to get from point A to point B. Now, think about how this data works, how this app encompasses all the data that's behind it. Waze takes into account multiple data streams that are merged together and blended and processed in nanoseconds to be able to give drivers real-time data. Waze wouldn't work effectively if it was something that was only 10 minutes old, if it had a batch time, if it had time to calculate. It has to be real time. And it's not just, how do I get from point A to point B, but how do I do it in route that may change? As I'm going from my pickup spot or where I'm getting into a car and putting the Waze on to where I get out, that route is optimized at that given time, at that given moment. And as I take that route, I may be instructed to change routes because things have happened in real time that would now say that this is no longer the optimal way to get from point A to point B. So you think about all the data wrapped up in this. You have traffic information, police activity, construction activity, weather reports, and real-time user feedback on what's happening. And all this information is being processed in a way that spits out a map that you follow. Now think about how disruptive this is. Just to our lives, how we do things. We rely much more on GPS than we realize. A few years ago, before we had things like this, we had to use atlases. Eventually we got to things like MapQuest and online mapping tools that would allow us to kind of get some of the directions down, but it wouldn't be real time. It wouldn't necessarily become always being updated. But with Waze, we have that. And then think about how disruptive this is, not just to how our lives have evolved when it comes to navigating traffic, but think about the businesses that were knocked out because of the disruption caused by Waze. Imagine if your business was a map-making business. This kind of application of technology, of big data, disrupted your business and probably most likely killed it. This is happening all over in every industry. Every industry is facing this wave of big data that's causing disruption. And the idea really is, are you going to be somebody who's going to use the data to disrupt things, or are you going to be disrupted by somebody else's use of data? That's kind of the first question we want to think about right now. So, when it comes to using big data analytics, there's a lot of data out there that supports the use of data, which sounds kind of funny, but if you think about it, there's little doubt among pretty much everyone in industry, in any business, across a bunch of decision makers out there that using data will allow you to be better at what you do. And this is just a random, some data points I pulled off of Bain Consulting, talking about companies that use big data are twice as likely to be in the top quartile of financial performance, 3 times more likely to execute decisions as intended, and 5 times more likely to make decisions faster. So the idea is that basically analytics, the application of data, makes you more successful. Our biggest challenge with data, though, is do you have all the data you need? And are you capturing it? And can you use it? So the first thing we really want to think about when it comes to our own data is if you think of all this area out here in the blue, this is noise. This is all the data available to you, right? And most of it doesn't have a lot of value. The information that you really want to capture to use is not everything. It's a subset of all the data available to you. It could be something as simple as trying to figure out how to answer a question in your business. How do I know which location to expand to? How do I know which product to grandfather and which product to innovate and do more with? You have to look at that data, and when you're trying to capture that data, a lot of times our current ways of capturing data brings in a lot of the noise. And so we have to figure out how to realign our gathering of data so we're just gathering information. And this is part of what analytics is all about. When you have all this big data, you want to be able to, again, focus all your time and energy on what you really need. That's like being on top of the wave and not being crushed by it. So it's a couple of examples of big data. What makes big data complicated for a lot of us is that there's what's called 5 V's of big data. It's not just size, it's also the velocity, how fast we get data. It's also the values of what the data represents. It can be the veracity of data. Is it real data? Is it something we can really work with? I mean, we live in a world of fake news. It's hard to figure out sometimes if the data that we're looking at is exactly what it's telling us, or is there something being done to the data? Is it trustworthy? Is it authentic? Those are things we have to ask nowadays. And then the variety of data. Some data we have, data that consists in simple spreadsheets and databases and files, where it's numbers, where it's things we can calculate, where it's ones and zeros. That's just a piece of the data though. A lot of data that businesses have available to them to analyze in their business nowadays is actually on the web. It's actually things like social media data. In fact, they say that potentially as much as 80% of your business's data is what's called unstructured. And if you really want to, again, optimize your use of information and not get caught up in looking at data you don't need, you have to really think through how are you acquiring data and just getting to what you want. Because the complexity here of these 5 V's means we get to be spinning our wheels a lot. And there are a lot of companies out there, a lot of organizations that are struggling because they're not seeing value out of their ability to analyze data because they're not optimized. They're not able to actually get to just the data they need. And one of the problems that they face is they probably don't have a good understanding of how analytics works in a process. So, we talked about big data, and as we capture data, we have to first inspect it. And one of the problems we have is first we have to ask ourselves, can I use this or not? Will this data I have in front of me help answer a question? Is it going to solve a problem? If it is, then we do something with it. If it's not, then in a sense we throw it back and don't use it. And that process in itself can be very time consuming. But once we've identified the right data, the next part of the process is to clean the data. We have to make sure the data is clean, to make sure the data can be used in your analytics. Now, this could be as much as trying to fix typos. It could be trimming things that are not in part of the data you need. It could be reformatting information. It could be combining data from different data sources. It could be building joins and table joins and things like SQL. It could be a lot of different things that help us take the data and start putting it into a shape where we can do something with it. This is where we start transforming that data into information. This is how we're starting to take that massive amount of noise and funnel it down to just what we need. And once we do that, then we can start building models of the data. The most common way to model data across every business is pivot tables in Excel. Pivot tables are the fundamental example of modeling data. Now, a lot of companies do a lot more than that. A lot of them build predictive models. They build statistical analysis tools. They do things that allow them to be much more insightful with their data because they're building a bunch of tools that look at variables and process information much, much faster than you can do in something like Excel. But conceptually it's the same, it's modeling data. These first 4 parts of the process are things that we really don't think about when we think about analytics and big data. They're IT stuff. They're things that happen generally before a lot of us actually look at the data. Now, if we're in a small business and we're pulling data off social media sites, we're pulling data from different internet sources, we're looking at data from our online commerce, from point of sale transactions, whatever it may be, you're trying to bring all this data in, and you have to do all these first 4 parts before you can even begin to analyze it. And that is very time consuming if it's manually done. A lot of bigger companies invest in either automating this processes and or hiring a lot of people to do this kind of work. But for smaller businesses, this can be a really big drain. So by the time you get towards the end of the process where you're actually looking for patterns in data and discovering opportunities and mitigating risks and identifying things that you can do with your business, you've already kind of spent all the time you can afford on analysis because you spent this time inspecting and cleaning, transforming, and modeling. That's the most important part of analytics, is looking for patterns. We should be able to do as much as the first 4 parts as automatically as possible without a lot of manual work, so we can spend most of our time on the analysis phase. Now, in Excel, I'm going to show you a little bit later some tips to help us get through these first 4 parts so that we're actually ready to look at patterns. We've put in some shortcuts that allow us to do things a little faster, to optimize our data for Excel. Once you've actually gotten to point 5, though, where you've discovered patterns in your data, the next piece that's very important is actually making suggestions. Now, when you make suggestions, the idea here is you're reporting something to somebody, you're sharing something with somebody that's then going to take that analysis and do something with it. Another area we struggle with when it comes to Excel is how we share data, how we visualize the data, and why it's important to visualize things the right way. At the end of my talk, I'm going to talk briefly about data visualization in Excel, because I think that's where we have to put a lot of our efforts. We can become really good at doing things in Excel, but to get to the point where we can do things in Excel, we have to have our data orderly and organized. And then once we're able to do things in Excel, when it comes to analysis, then we have to think about what happens next. So we have to kind of think of this entire process of analytics and figure out how our data is flowing through our process and where we can do things to optimize the data for use in Excel and optimize our output once we've used Excel to drive business decisions. Does this make sense? Any questions so far? Okay. All right. So basically, to be able to help us organize our data, I want to kind of break it down in a couple different points of where we should be with our business. And this will lead us to what we're going to do is take a quick assessment of our business to kind of assess where our business is currently at when it comes to the use of Excel and analytics in general. So the first is we need to be able to identify the data. We talked about that already, where we have to make sure we have the right data. But conceptually, you want to be able to always be thinking about where do I go to get the data I need to answer the question I have. And if you know how to do that quickly and you have it optimized, then you don't spend a lot of time doing it. It can become almost automatic. In fact, ideally, the identification of data should be as automated as possible so that you just get it. And then when you get it, it has to be stored, it has to be inventoried, it has to be cataloged, it has to be put in a place where you're able to quickly access what you need. I liken this to a library. For most of us that have spent time in libraries, we know that when you have to do a book report for a class back when we were in school, say your book report's on Russian literature, you would go to the card catalog to figure out which part of the library houses books on Russian literature. And you'd be able to look it up in the card catalog. And nowadays, a lot of that's electronic. You don't have to physically go to a card catalog. But the idea still is you go to the section that has Russian literature, and you get books by Dostoevsky and, I forget somebody else. Someone throw me out. Chekhov, thank you. And you compare Dostoevsky and Chekhov, and then you write an essay on it for your book report, right? So that's the kind of thing that you have to be able to do with your data. You have to be able to have your data organized like a library organizes books. So you know where to go when you get it. And you have that inventory system that allows you to track it. This is the kind of stuff that if you have a lot of Excel files, if you have Excel everywhere, and your inventory is not very well built, you can spend a lot of time looking for things, or losing things, or recreating things, or re-downloading things. So it's important to really think about, before you start using Excel on a regular basis, how are you going to store stuff? How are you going to label it? What kind of naming conventions you're going to use? So you're able to constantly find things quickly. It's really, really hard to do because a lot of times we always do things in the moment and we're rushing from one task to the next, and we don't take the time to really inventory what we do with our data. And for Excel, that can be a challenge because if you create a lot of versions of the same thing, if you make monthly files and every month you're doing a variation of a previous one, especially if you're doing some kind of report, it can be really challenging if you don't store it in a consistent way. And especially if you're part of a team doing this and everyone's doing a little bit different, it can get really scary. So one of the things you want to do to optimize Excel is make sure you really spend some time thinking about the inventory. The next is, how are things integrated? How are things going to be taken and put into action? When you integrate things, you have to think through not just what you're doing, but how does it go from what you do to what somebody else does? Now, if you're analyzing stuff just for yourself, that's one thing. But most of us generally don't analyze things for ourselves. We're analyzing things for an audience, for end users, for management, for some decision maker somewhere else. And when we're doing that, we have to think about how are they going to get the data and what are they going to do with it. And we probably all know that if we use Excel a lot and we're good with Excel, we can look at a spreadsheet and it doesn't overwhelm us. It's actually something we enjoy looking at. We like numbers. We're weird like that. We're nerds. We're uncommon. Most people look at a spreadsheet full of numbers and they freak out. They don't like it. One of the things that we do to help in those situations is we build things like pivot tables and data visualizations to help make sense of all these numbers. So when you're thinking about how to actually integrate what you're doing, you want to think through who's going to use this analysis. What's the best way to show them what I see? And how can I do it in a way that makes sure that their decisions are following what I think they should be doing based on my data? That's something we'll talk about in a little bit. But these are the 3 I's of analytics. You want to make sure that you can quickly and easily identify data, you have it inventoried well, and you think about how to integrate that. And when you're using Excel, you have to think about each of these phases when it comes to Excel. Because if Excel is your primary tool that you're using in your business to do analytics, which surprisingly, majority of companies out there today of all sizes and shapes still use Excel as their primary tool for analysis, you want to think about how it fits into the 3 I's. In addition to the 3 I's, any questions so far on the 3 I's? No? Okay. We have the 3 T's. The 3 T's, talent, technology, technique. We want to think about these as well. Do we have the talent to really optimize Excel? Do we know Excel really well? Or do we need to get trained? Do we need experience? Do we need to be able to do something? Do we have people to rely on in our business that can't use Excel very well, but we're doing things that would require them so? For example, we talked earlier, we mentioned how if you're using Excel and somebody else is using Sheets, and they send you a file in Sheets, and you can't easily convert that to Excel, and even if you convert it, it may lose some of the functionality. That's the problem, right? So the talent issue there isn't the fact that you don't know how to use Excel, it's your audience is not using Excel. Right? So you want to be on the same page with your ability to use a technology. And technology is the next part we want to ask ourselves. Excel, by itself, is pretty universal. But what else around Excel is being used? A lot of people use Excel in combination with other applications. So what other applications are in your business or in what you're doing that people would need to integrate with Excel? Access, a business intelligence tool like Tableau or Power BI? Are you taking things from a database like an Oracle database and writing SQL code to extract things and export it into an Excel file? These kind of things also impact your ability to make Excel optimal in a business, is understanding all the technology. And then finally the technique, knowing how to do things, the tricks, the little things you can do to be better with it. And it comes as simple as knowing a bunch of formulas and different things you can do in Excel to make things more optimal. It also matters about how you visualize things with your visualizations in Excel. All these are techniques that you can learn and improve as well. So the 3 T's go along with the 3 I's. And as we're thinking about the 3 I's and the 3 T's, we're thinking about our own business. And where are we at right now when it comes to Excel in general, in specific, and analytics in general in our business? Is our business one where people are very data-driven or not driven at all by data? I liken a company that's very old-fashioned, very old school with their use of information as a level 1. They barely use Excel for anything. Level 2, level 3, level 4, you're using more and more analytics, more and more data, more and more uses for Excel. Level 5 is a company where everyone is just, they got data, they use it all the time, they have access to it, there's no problems in accessing or using the data. They all have the tools they need, the talent, the training, it's all there. But where are you at? In what you're doing, are you a 1, a 2, a 3, 4, or 5? As you ask yourself that question, the goal would be, if I think I'm a 3, I want to get to a 4. How do I level up? How do I mature the ability to do analytics? And how does Excel play into that? That's something we want to think about as we go through the rest of our talk today. Finally, to do your assessment, and this is something that I do with clients, so if ever you come across a company where they need to really kind of look at their entire analytics infrastructure, including the use of Excel, to provide analysis, and they're looking to figure out how do I level up, how do I get better, how do I improve things, I would walk them through an assessment. And this is a simple summary of an assessment where you kind of look at your business and figure out where are you with the 3 I's and the 3 T's. Do you feel you have the ability to get the data you need? Is it well managed? Are you able to effectively put it to use? Do you have the right people, the right training, the right technology? If you have all that in place, then you're a level 5 company. But if you don't have all that in place, you're somewhere below that and you're trying to level up. So you want to identify which area do you want to focus on first? Do you feel that the biggest requirement you have in your business right now is to get the inventory figured out, add structure, bring some order to the chaos? Or is it more that you got the data figured out, it's the people? You just don't have people who have the skill set required because they don't know Excel very well to be able to do what you expect them to be able to do. As a decision maker, an influencer in a business, then you take the results of this assessment and you figure out how to focus your energies to level up. Any questions? Now I know, Andrew, you've done this before, so last time we talked, you talked to some of the clients you're working with, were probably in the threes, right, in the middle, maybe a few twos, trying to figure out how to get them to level up. Has that changed, or is there anything new you've been working
It's
on?
about the same, and these are long-term clients. You know, they basically come to me as they need more functionality.
Okay.
The rest of the time, they're so busy, and they don't really have time to make changes.
Right. So that's a challenge we have, right? So
Yeah.
if we build an infrastructure and we expect it to last forever, basically, we know it won't, but we kind of hope it will, right?
Yeah.
The mentality a lot of people have, especially in smaller businesses, they really fall behind quickly.
Yeah.
And they're no longer going to cut an edge. And those are the ones that worry me the most, because those are the ones that they're going to get run over by a tsunami of data, and they're going to be disrupted by somebody bigger than them or more agile than them that's able to apply data. So those are the kind of clients that I would want to do the assessment with to figure out, okay, you can't fix everything out first, but what's like a critical one? Which one should you start with? Where should you start looking at this part of your business to level up, whether it be bringing better inventory or having better training or looking for better technology, but you got to do something. And it should be something you're fairly often going back and doing to make sure that you are progressing. It's going to be a rare business that can survive in today's day and age, competing with the likes of Amazon and whoever else and their competitors may be, if they can't be data driven. And if they're struggling with Excel, that's usually the best place to start, is how do we get better at Excel? So that's an example. So James, what about you? Where do you see most people that you work with in your environment falling?
I would say we're, overall as a company, I think we'd be a 3.
Okay.
Yeah, the majority of the people though would be, probably, the majority of people in the company would probably be closer to a 2.
Okay.
But
So
overall.
yeah, and that's normal. Again, you know, this is I think it's unfortunately normal. I would wish that people would be more successful, but we're seeing this huge separation between the haves and the have-nots when it comes haves and have-nots when it comes to uses of data and the ability to be disruptive. The amount of money that someone like Amazon is investing in this is mind-boggling. I just saw an article the other day where Amazon's blocking off $700 million to do upskill training, to be able to retrain their current workforce and future workforce for the skills they need tomorrow and the next day and down the road, because the skills they have now don't translate into the skills they're going to need down the road. So knowing that they can't just rely on schools to produce what they want naturally, Amazon's got to invest in this. Now Amazon is going to invest $700 million into upskilling their workforce. How much are you guys going to spend? And I don't mean you guys, you know, yourselves, but your clients. How much are you going to spend to upskill your workforce? And if it's nothing, how are you going to compete with Amazon? That's the question we have to ask, and it's scary. You know, it's not fair. That's the world we live in. And again, to me, one of the most logical places to start is that if you have somebody who in your business is responsible for using Excel every day to provide information to a team of people, and that person doesn't have the best knowledge of Excel, they do a lot of things manually, they can't do things automated and use a lot of shortcuts, then that's your first investment, is upskill that person. So anyway, long story short, thank you for sharing where you think your clients and companies are at. So you need to know Excel. It's amazing how most of us look at Excel and we don't look at the 2 most important tabs. We know how to do the basics. We use the first, the default tabs that come up in Excel, like home. We can insert a few things. But it gets to the data tab and the formulas tab, we get scared. It's going to be hard. And those of us get used to doing certain things, we probably don't master a whole lot. So what I would challenge people that are trying to level up with Excel is block off an hour a week. Just 1 hour a week. Make it a Friday afternoon or something like that. Take an hour and literally go through every different icon and every drop down in the Data and Formulas tab and figure out what you're not doing now that you could add. And I guarantee you do this for like 6 weeks. After that 6 weeks, it's become a habit, and you're going to keep doing it. You're going to keep learning with Excel. If you don't block off time to do that, you're only going to try to improve with Excel when you're forced to. When you get to a stopping point where there's something you want to be able to do in Excel, but you can't, or you forgot how. And then you're going to learn something for a minute and forget it. So using Excel and mastering Excel requires us to really think about all the things Excel can do. And most of us just do basic things in Excel. Most of us don't actually ever touch much on these tabs. Now we go to the data tab, maybe use a sort, maybe use a filter, but text to column, remove duplicates, data validation, consolidative, what if analysis, all this stuff allows you to do shortcuts, to do things quicker and faster that you wouldn't be able to do without having to do things manually if you didn't rely on these built-in functions. Then you have the formulas. All these formulas are built to be able to make things quicker and faster. And if you start figuring out how to use them, your Excel use becomes much more dynamic. And you all of a sudden have much more ability to process a lot of information in Excel. So it starts with that, getting to know Excel. That's challenge number one for us, is what do we need to learn to level up ourselves and our organizations when it comes to using Excel. Pivot tables are something I find that most people, if they're required to learn how to do them for their job, they do. And they do the basics. They can insert a pivot table, they can drag and drop different fields into the different areas and build a basic, aggregated report in pivot tables. But beyond that, they get challenged. Trying to use a pivot table to do multiple pivot tables, trying to use pivot tables to put visualizations on top of the pivot tables. Some people struggle with this kind of stuff. And again, it's because they're not doing it every day. It's something they don't have to do on a regular basis. But again, an area to really level up and maximize your ability to get the value out of Excel, pivot tables is a great place to start. Another tip I'll give you is simple things like this. When you're doing counts and you're trying to figure out how much information you have in a certain column or a certain row, there are ways to do that. We all know that if you go to the bottom of Excel and you highlight a column, the bottom will tell you exactly how many cells in that column or row are filled. But sometimes it can be challenging if you don't have data in those cells, or if you don't have numbers in those cells. So you can actually do a count A, which will give you everything in every cell, versus just numbers if you do a count. So Excel defaults to count, it doesn't default to count A. So it's just a little tip right there to help you figure out how to count stuff in Excel that's not a number. Another is to trim. Trim's very useful to be able to take off trailing spaces. A lot of times we have information in Excel and it's got an extra space, especially with names and addresses and things that are encoded manually and then uploaded into Excel, or where we have somebody doing data entry and a lot of that data comes out kind of messy. We can use a trim feature to be able to fix a lot of that. And if you have thousands of rows of data and you know there's a lot of mess in it and you're having to clean it, some people will just, because they don't know how to do the trim, they just go through and manually fix every cell, and 6 hours later, they're still doing it, where if they would have ran the trim formula, it would have been done in microseconds. So this is an example, another tip. Max min is another one to be able to look at the maximum min in your count, kind of see where your ranges are at. Combining cell data, you can combine cell data using the ampersand symbol, or combine using the concat function. This will take two different rows of data and combine them. Say, for example, you've got a list of customers and you want to mail something to them, and you have a list of customers where you have the first name and the last name in different columns, and you want to combine it, or you have first name, last name in a column, but it's last name, comma, first name. You use these functions to either separate or join columns to be able to not have to, again, go through and manually fix that information. Another tip would be using VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP to be able to search for values. A lot of people get stuck on this. They think this is really hard to do, but again, it's not that challenging. If you really want to be able to figure out this kind of stuff, when you take that hour a week to learn how to do a good VLOOKUP or an HLOOKUP, if you're not sure, if you don't have a resource, you can go to the help menu. You can go to Microsoft's website. You can go on YouTube. I'll mention a few of my favorite YouTube experts in a minute. But basically, all these things that you do will make you more efficient. all these tips are about trying to optimize your time by automating a lot of what a lot of people end up doing manually in Excel. Excel can also do some very powerful advanced stuff. People really don't know that you can build predictive models in Excel. You can do statistical analysis in Excel. So if you want to start getting into more of the data science, the high level stuff, you can do things like what if analysis, correlation, regression. It takes a little bit of time to learn this stuff. You have to have the ability to kind of think with statistical analysis in your mindset. If you have that background, took a stats class in college, or you have some experience with this kind of stuff, you don't have to go out and buy new software to do a lot of this stuff, especially if your data sources aren't massive. If you're working for a small or medium company, and your number of clients and your amount of data you have to work with is not something that is too big for Excel to handle, you can do all this stuff in Excel, and it will be much more cheaper and much easier than going out and buying and learning new software packages, this kind of stuff. So predictive analytics is something that people, on the most part, don't think of they can do in Excel. Now, if you have a data scientist and they want to build things in like R or Python, and they're doing all this kind of like high-level stuff, that's fine. Let them do it. But if you don't have that access, you can't hire someone to do that kind of stuff. Learn how to do it in Excel. It's worth your time. Any questions so far on Excel, I guess? Anything you've used before that you think would be a great resource that people don't really, you've had to show people? You've had to go around the office or the room and say, hey, you guys, here's a shortcut to do this. Anything come to mind for you, James?
Actually, VLOOKUP, I use it all the time.
Good, okay.
And I try to share it with people, and unless you use it on a regular basis,
You just forget it. And
you have to go back and
Yeah.
you forget to put false at the end.
Yep. And it's always a challenge when you have done it in a while and you're sitting there, you're like, your brain's trying so hard to figure out, what am I forgetting? What am I forgetting? I forgot one thing, like a value or a symbol or something. Yeah, but that's good. VLOOKUP. Yeah. Andrew, what about you?
I like the way Excel can extrapolate a pattern
Yep.
of numbers, 1, 2, 3, or even
Dates.
or
Yeah.
whatever, and just drag it down, and it creates that entire list for you.
Yeah, you can either fill series or you can actually just grab the bottom right-hand corner and just drag down. Yeah, it's a pretty nice little feature. So Excel's got a lot of those. And if you get a group of, the average office, let's say a company's got a couple hundred employees, they've got a management team, the management team's got 3 or 4 people who work on Excel every day to build reports and to process information. In that group, they probably all know a lot about a little, and they know a little about a lot, but they don't share it very well. And they're always asking each other, hey, how do you do this? How do you do this? That kind of group, stuff actually levels everyone up. But if we're not in that kind of environment where we're talking to everyone, doing the same kind of stuff all the time, we get isolated and we don't have resources to help us remember how to do these little things. So that's even more important why you take that hour a week to get out there and think about how to level up your skill sets, so you're able to constantly stay ahead of the curve when it comes to Excel. So, did you guys know you can do predictive modeling in Excel?
I took a stats class recently,
Okay.
a couple of years ago, and,
Mhm.
and the what-if analysis was some of the things we had to do as well as correlation.
Okay.
But haven't played with regression at all.
Yeah, if you're like a hardcore data scientist, you're gonna laugh at me for saying like do this in Excel, but that's because they can do it in other things. But your average guy working as a business analyst in a business or a manager, this for them this will be for them rocket science, and they need it though, because if they're not doing this kind of stuff, if you're not able to really look at the value of your marketing efforts, if you're not able to kind of really figure out what it is that has a connection and what's X is causing Y, how things are related, if you're not able to really kind of look through different scenarios, then you're really just kind of guessing. And all this stuff is built to help you mitigate the guessing and give you exactly what you should be doing. And this is where a lot of businesses fall short. They look at their data in Excel, and it's all historical data. It got them from where they started to where they're at now, and they're using that past to predict the future. And they do some trending, some forecasting. They're guessing though, right? They're guessing. When you start getting more into this kind of stuff, you can be more fine-tuned in your guessing, so it doesn't feel like guesswork as much as it feels like you're predicting the future. And this is how, again, a lot of companies out there could level up without a lot of effort, but they just don't know how to start. They're always think it's too expensive, too difficult, too time-consuming, and they're never able to kind of think about the overall gain they'll get from just taking an hour a week to learn how to do this kind of stuff. So that's Excel, some tips in Excel, just basic analysis tools. I'm going to talk briefly about visual learning because I mentioned that data visualization is a big part of Excel that's often overlooked. Visual learning is important because most of us learn visually. Audiences remember information better and can better recall it when it's been represented both visually and verbally. So ideally, when we're talking about stuff, when we're sharing information, especially on a conference call or in a staff meeting, we walk people through our data. And we often have a bunch of visuals, and we're given a story, a narrative, while we're sharing the visual. And if we're not picking the right visual, it can be very challenging. I know it's a bit hard to see, but this is a simple difference between a bar chart and a line chart. And it's showing, on average, what the average height of an American versus a person from the Netherlands, Dutch person, is. And Dutch, on average, are taller than Americans. A bar chart shows the average height differently. If you were to use that same data for a line chart, Americans here, Dutch here, it's confusing because you're looking at a contiguous line, right? But here, it's simple bars, makes it much easier. It's amazing how often we screw this up, right? We just go with what looks good to us at the time. We know the data. We don't have to make sense of it. We already understand it. So we just slap on whatever visual pops up in the wizard or whatever we're used to using, and we share it. And what we don't think about is because we knew about it before we visualized it, we know exactly what it is. Now the audience is having to go in reverse. They see the visual and they're trying to make sense of it. And a lot, very, very often, we pick the wrong visual and we throw our audience off. And we cause them to have a brain freeze. They go into cognitive dissonance. They're trying to figure out, I see something and it's not what he's saying, so I'm going to block out what he's saying and try to make sense of what I'm seeing. So as soon as they look at a bad visual, whatever you're trying to say to them, they just lose it, and they're focusing on trying to make sense of visual. This kind of simple mistake kills so many presentations, causes so many people to not get their message across. Data visualization at its core is simply taking data and converting it to visuals. We all do that all the time. We all know how to make a pie chart. It's like you can't use Excel without eventually getting around to making pie charts and line graphs, bar charts. The basic four. I call them the basic four. There are pie charts, there are line graphs, there are bar charts and column charts. We can all make those four every day. But Excel's got like 60 plus visuals that are in it. There's things like scatter plots, and there's things like histograms, and there's all the other kinds of visuals that Excel has that we rarely even try. It's amazing. You look at presentation for presentation for presentation, and you're always going to see these four visuals, unless that person that's designing the visuals really knows how to visualize data. Then they'll start doing things that are able to not just visualize data, but to start telling stories, to build compelling stories. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. A good pie chart can be worth 1,000 rows of data, but it can also be the opposite. People look at a picture and they know what to do. They know what to see. They know they can take an action. But if you're not telling them what you want them to see, they'll take the wrong action. So it's important to think about how you visualize data. A couple quick tips, pie charts. The most frequently used chart is a pie chart, and pie charts are great for showing a breakdown of proportion or distribution. However, we often make pie charts that are not effective. If you have to put more than 3 slices in a pie chart, don't use a pie chart. It's a golden rule of visual design, especially if any of the slices are similar in size. If your pie chart is 50%, 25%, 20, 25%, and maybe it's 30% and 20%, something close to this, it's kind of harder to see the difference. Now this one makes sense because it's clear. But if you had a lot of slices in here, the more slices, the more confusing it gets. And then the easier you lose your audience in your visual. They're sitting there trying to add it up. They're not listening to you talk anymore. They're not looking at what you want them to see. Their brain's going off sideways, trying to figure out, make sense of something. Another thing we can do about pie charts is it should always equal 100%. It's supposed to, right? But if we don't label it right, or if we take things off because some of the slide is so tiny, we can't show the number, do the kinds of things because we think it makes sense to us, again, we're going to lose our audience. The thing about pie charts, and you see it here in this visual, which is really great, is we should stick with lessons that help us learn. Think about how we learn. One of the first things we learn as a very young child is the simple color coding that goes with good and bad. Almost universally, green means good, and red means bad, or worry, or danger, or alert. Green means cash, green means progress, green means go, right? Stop sign, right? So when you do a pie chart, if you're trying to show something that's good, have it be green. If you're trying to show something that's worrisome or concerning or bad, put it in red. People don't have to make the brain just completely makes that connection like that. If you do the opposite, if you want to tell them how great your product number one is doing, because it's green right here for 52%, but instead of green you use red, then they're going to go, is that a problem? Should I be worried about this? And they'll make sense of it. Maybe it'll take them a second or two to make the connection. But that second or two it takes them to make sense of it, again, they blocked out what you're saying. They got stuck. They weren't following along because their brain is stuck on why is red means, oh yeah, okay, I got it, right? That kind of dissonance happens when we don't really think through our visuals. Another common one is bar charts, right? We use bar charts to visualize and distribute proportion of data items when they are in more than 3 categories, right? So if you have a pie chart and it's got multiple slices, try a bar chart instead. A bar chart would be good to show overall revenue by products, right? So you have 4 products, you're trying to see the most profitable product, you're breaking it down by percentage. It's easier to understand because they're kind of close together, right? Your difference here is less than 10%. So if you had a pie chart for all these kind of things, all the slices would look kind of the same. You wouldn't clearly be able to see which one's 1, 2, 3, and 4, but in a bar chart you can. Again, this kind of stuff isn't rocket science, but we overlook it a lot. Line chart simply looks at things over time. A couple of points about line charts. Always use a zero baseline. If you don't have a zero baseline, because say all your data is between 1,000 and 2,000, and you put a zero baseline in there, it's going to make the chart look weird and everything will be crunched to the top. You may think it makes sense to take out the zero baseline, but research shows, study after study shows that with no zero baseline, your audience is looking for it. They're trying to find it. Where's that zero baseline? So instead of taking the zero baseline out, take out some of the data or use a different visual. Another thing to do with line charts is when you have outliers. Sometimes we have line charts where we have a bunch of stuff here between 50 and 100, and we have one thing up here at 400. Maybe our top product is selling so much more than everything else. It makes the line chart like this. And that we can, instead of having a clear distinction between 2 and 3, we just see how much different 1 is from 2 and 3. That may be what we want to see. But it may also be the case where we want to see the difference between 2 and 3. So take 1 out and just have 2 and 3. It's the kind of things you want to think about with line charts. Again, think about what you're trying to tell your audience. Are you trying to explain to them that there's a difference you want them to see? Are you trying to focus on what the good story is, or what the bad story is, or the whole story is? Each way you answer that question will define how you should make the appropriate chart. Column charts. So column charts are typically used to compare several items in specific ranges. We start with basic column charts. We can do clustered, stacked. Each one has its best time to use and worst time to use. Sometimes we just want to show a difference. So we pick a basic column chart. Sometimes we want to show within that column, within that category, sub-items or subcategories. So we use a stack chart or a cluster chart. Again, think through, if my audience looks at this, will they be able to make sense of it? Or do they have to stop and figure out what I'm talking about? So that's the kind of examples of just some basic visuals in Excel. What are some other visuals you guys use in Excel? Besides these 4, what else have you used on a regular basis?
Mostly what I use is over time, so I use line charts.
Line charts for pretty much everything. Yeah.
I don't really use Excel enough
Okay.
to say what I would use on a regular basis.
But beyond these 4, can you think of one that you've used on at least a little bit in the past?
Mostly I would use bar charts, so I couldn't really tell you.
See, and that's an area where it works, right? But to make it work better, to be more effective, maybe of the 60 plus visual different options in Excel, you pick one that's better for what you're trying to show.
Yeah.
So, any other thoughts on that one? Visual?
I use spark lines, but just very, very rarely.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, they all have uses for different industries, different businesses, different things, but you can find a lot of other ones that will add more value than the basics. And again, it's that time thing, right? We go with what we know. We go because it's easy. One more thing I'll give you guys that people make a mistake in a lot is they stick with the defaults visuals in Excel. So Excel defaults the font size to really small. It the default colors, depending on your color scheme, but if it's default colors in Excel, they're going to be kind of like earth tones. They're not going to be very bright or bold. And a lot of times when you want to tell a message with your visuals, you want to make certain things bold and big. I mean, when you're thinking about, especially something that's going to be on a screen, it's going to be displayed in a staff meeting, you want to have that big boldness that people's attention is grabbed. So again, little things like that we can think about. So that's just my quick tips on Excel. My 2 favorite experts on YouTube, if you want to go out and as part of that hour a week, watch a video to kind of help get familiar with a certain concept. Layla Garani, every week she puts out a new video on what to do on Excel. She's amazing. She's easy to understand. She's got a great style. It's all pretty much 10 to 15 minutes, and they're all things that you can apply while she's telling you. Another one is ExcelJet. ExcelJet is more of a formal training, but it's on YouTube and it's free. It's a little bit longer, a little more complex projects. They don't publish it quite as much, but between the 2 of those, I can find 90% of the help I need if I get stuck. I used to always go to different sources, whatever I go to Microsoft or go to different areas to find help if I get stuck with something. But now I've just gotten used to going to YouTube and just type in how do I make a histogram in Excel, and boom, experts are showing you for free nonstop. So that's my favorite Excel experts out there. You can level up with Excel. There are courses on Coursera or Udemy, which I recommend looking into if you want to again build that into that hour a week. I can't I can't over explain. I can't think of the right word. Anyway, it's the ice cream. I want to get the ice cream. I can't state it enough that you've got to apply some discipline to mastering Excel. If you want to optimize the use of Excel in a business, it's going to have to be a lifelong learning thing, or just a career-long learning thing. And these are 2 examples of places I've gone in the past to take classes as well. So I do have an online coaching. So if you want to spend an hour a week with me, I do a special where I can do an online coaching with you guys, walking you through different parts of analytics, each of the processes. So there's 6 parts, right? So each week we would talk about how to apply Excel and apply it to one of the processes, whether it be starting with identifying your data or cleaning your data or up to analyzing it and presenting it. So it's available out there if you're curious. And I have a book that should be done soon. My goal is to have it out there in the next couple weeks. It's almost finished. And that's last thing I'll talk about is we talked about how to be disruptive or be disrupted, and I gotta change that to typo. Be disruptive or be disrupted. Talked about the analytics process, talked about how to find the right data to level up, talked about how to optimize Excel and to make better visuals. So that's my presentation. Thank you for your time. Now go out and analyze something. Cool. Any questions?